What does it feel like to stare death in the face at 35,000 feet, with nowhere to run and the ground impossibly far below? For the 243 passengers aboard British Airways Flight 2937 on that fateful November morning, this question transformed from philosophical to horrifyingly literal in the span of mere seconds. The day began with mundane predictability. Terminal 5 at London Heathrow Airport hummed with its usual orchestrated chaos, the percussion of rolling luggage, the chorus of multilingual announcements, and the steady rhythm of boarding passes being scanned. Flight 2937 to Singapore via Dubai was scheduled for an on-time departure at 8:45 a.m. The Boeing 737-300ER gleamed under the terminal's bright lights, its massive engines waiting to propel passengers toward business meetings, family reunions, and adventures half a world away. Captain Eleanor Reeves performed her pre-flight checklist with the meticulous attention to detail that had earned her respect during her 17 years with British Airways. At 45, she was at the peak of her career, confident, experienced, and respected. The November weather presented no particular challenges. A light drizzle washed the tarmac, but visibility was good, and the forecast promised clear skies once they climbed above the cloud cover. The aircraft had just undergone its regular maintenance check 3 days prior, with no issues reported. In the terminal, security officer Ahmed Nasri was halfway through his 12-hour shift at the security checkpoint. He noticed the man in the navy blue suit because of the contrast. While most business travelers appeared slightly harried, checking watches and phones with impatient frequency, this man moved with unusual deliberation. His carry-on, an expensive-looking leather briefcase, passed through the scanner without raising flags. The man's passport identified him as Richard Harlow, a 52-year-old British citizen. Nothing about him triggered any alerts. Nasri nodded him through with a professional, "Have a good flight, sir." Unknown to Nasri, the passport was an exceptionally high-quality forgery. The man calling himself Richard Harlow was actually Dmitry Voronin, a former Russian military intelligence officer with specialized training in aviation systems. The perfectly ordinary-looking briefcase contained components that, when assembled, would become a device capable of overriding certain aircraft control systems. This technology, developed for Russian military applications, had never before been deployed in a civilian context. Seated in 9C business class, Voronin appeared to be nothing more than a prosperous businessman, perhaps in finance or international consulting. He ordered a sparkling water before takeoff and politely declined the champagne offered as a pre-departure beverage. The flight attendant, Sophia Chen, would later remark that he seemed perfectly pleasant, unmemorable really. Captain Reeves's voice came over the intercom at 8:37 a.m., welcoming passengers aboard and providing the standard information about flight time, approximately 7 hours to Dubai, the first leg of the journey, and weather conditions. The cabin crew demonstrated safety procedures with practiced efficiency. By 8:52 a.m., the massive aircraft began pushing back from the gate, its engines spooling up with their characteristic deep-throated roar. Among the passengers, the demographic mosaic typical of international flights from London took shape. Business travelers occupied many of the premium seats, while families, tourists, and a university sports team filled the economy section. 73-year-old Ethel Whitaker was traveling to visit her daughter and newborn grandchild in Singapore. Jason and Melissa Cooper were embarking on their honeymoon, having saved for 3 years to afford the trip. Dr. Rajiv Sharma was returning home after presenting his research at a medical conference. Each passenger carried their own stories, hopes, and reasons for being on that particular aircraft on that specific day. Flight 2937 joined the queue for takeoff, waiting behind 3 other aircraft as they each accelerated down Heathrow's runway 27L and lifted into the grey London sky. At 9:07 a.m., it was their turn. The powerful engines surged, pressing passengers back into their seats as the aircraft gathered speed. The subtle bump, bump, bump of the runway joints gave way to sudden smoothness as the wheels left the ground. The aircraft banked gently to the right, beginning its programmed departure route. The first hour of the flight proceeded with the reassuring predictability that makes commercial aviation the safest form of transportation in human history. The fasten seatbelt sign switched off with a gentle chime. Flight attendants began the first beverage service. Passengers settled into their personal routines, some donning noise-cancelling headphones, others opening laptops or books, many simply closing their eyes to catch up on sleep. In the cockpit, Captain Reeves and First Officer Thomas Wilson monitored the aircraft's systems as it climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The autopilot was engaged, and the flight management computer was executing the programmed route with digital precision. They exchanged professional banter, discussing a recent change to company procedures and comparing notes on a new restaurant near their crew accommodations in Singapore. At 10:12 a.m., as the aircraft passed over Brussels, the first anomaly appeared. A momentary flicker on the primary flight display caught Wilson's attention. "Did you see that?" he asked Reeves, who nodded with a slight frown. A diagnostic check revealed no issues. They made a note to mention it to the maintenance team upon landing in Dubai, but assessed no immediate concern. What they couldn't know was that the flicker represented the first tentative connection between Voronin's device, now assembled inside the lavatory nearest to the cockpit, and the aircraft's systems. The device was probing, seeking entry points, testing defenses. At 10:17 a.m., Voronin returned to his seat, leaving the device running its programmed sequence. To the passengers around him, he appeared to be nothing more than a businessman returning from the restroom. He opened his laptop, seemingly absorbed in a spreadsheet. In reality, a secondary interface on the laptop showed him the progress of his device's intrusion attempts. At 10:23 a.m., the cabin lights flickered briefly. Captain Reeves noticed simultaneous anomalies in several non-critical systems. This time, the diagnostic routine returned an error code she hadn't encountered before. She radioed the British Airways technical support team on the ground, describing the symptoms and requesting guidance. The response from technical support was cautious, but not alarming. Flight 2937. These symptoms match a known software glitch in the entertainment system that can occasionally affect cabin lighting. It poses no threat to flight systems. Recommend running full diagnostic sequence Alpha 37. Reeves acknowledged and initiated the suggested diagnostic routine. Under normal circumstances, this would have isolated and resolved the issue. However, the diagnostic itself became the vector through which Voronin's device gained deeper access. By seeking out all connected systems, the diagnostic inadvertently created pathways that the intrusion software exploited. At 10:29 a.m., as the aircraft crossed into German airspace, the first critical systems began showing signs of compromise. The flight management computer displayed momentary inconsistencies in navigational data. The autopilot disengaged with a warning tone, forcing Captain Reeves to take manual control while Wilson attempted to identify the cause. In the cabin, passengers remained largely unaware of any issues, interpreting the slight change in the aircraft's movement as ordinary turbulence. Flight attendant James Harrison noticed the autopilot disconnect warning light on the cabin management panel, but followed protocol by continuing service while waiting for instructions from the cockpit. At 10:32 a.m., Captain Reeves's voice came over the crew intercom. "Cabin crew, this is the captain. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation systems. Please take your jump seats and secure the cabin as a precaution." The tone was professional, giving no indication of the rapidly escalating confusion in the cockpit. Multiple systems were now showing conflicting information. The primary attitude indicator, which shows the aircraft's orientation relative to the horizon, disagreed with the backup system by nearly 15 degrees. The airspeed indicators fluctuated erratically. Most concerning, the controls were becoming increasingly unresponsive. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Reeves transmitted to air traffic control. "British Airways 2937 Heavy, experiencing multiple system failures and degraded control response, requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport." The controller at Eurocontrol's Maastricht Upper Area Control Center responded promptly. "British Airways 2937, roger your mayday. Frankfurt Airport is approximately 100 nautical miles at your 2 o'clock position. Descend and maintain flight level 240. All traffic is being cleared from your path." Reeves acknowledged the instructions but found the aircraft resistant to her control inputs. "The aircraft isn't responding normally to commands," she informed ATC. "We're investigating, but please keep all traffic well clear, as our behavior may be unpredictable." In the cabin, the mood shifted from routine to concern. The aircraft's unusual movements, a series of shallow banks and subtle pitch changes that felt deliberate rather than turbulence-induced, caught passengers' attention. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with professional smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, checking seatbelts and securing loose items. Ethel Whitaker, the 73-year-old grandmother, clutched her rosary beads and began praying quietly. The honeymooning Coopers held hands, exchanging worried glances. The university's sports team, young and boisterous moments earlier, fell silent, their coach attempting to project calm confidence despite his own mounting anxiety. At 10:38 a.m., the situation in the cockpit deteriorated further. Multiple warning indicators illuminated simultaneously. The stick shaker, a device that vibrates the control column to warn of an impending aerodynamic stall, activated despite the aircraft's airspeed being well above stall threshold. The engine indicators showed normal operation, but the thrust levers became unresponsive when Reeves attempted to adjust power. "We're dealing with a potential cybersecurity breach," Wilson suggested, his voice tense but controlled. "These failures don't match any mechanical failure pattern in our training," Reeves nodded grimly. "Activate the circuit breakers for the non-essential avionics and reset the main flight computers." As Wilson moved to comply, the cockpit door chime sounded. Through the security camera, they saw flight attendant Sophia Chen outside, her expression urgent. Reeves authorized entry through the reinforced door. "Captain," Chen said as she stepped inside, "there's a passenger behaving strangely. He has some kind of electronic device he's trying to conceal, and he became extremely agitated when we announced we were diverting." "Where is he seated?" Reeves asked, her mind racing through security protocols. 9C, business class. Chen's report was interrupted by a sudden violent yaw as the aircraft banked sharply to the left without pilot input. Warning alarms blared as the bank angle exceeded safety parameters. Reeves fought the controls, applying full opposite aileron and rudder, but the aircraft continued its unauthorized turn. "Get back to the cabin," she ordered Chen. "Tell the purser to organize able-bodied passengers near 9C. Don't approach the suspect directly, but be ready to act on my command." As Chen left, Wilson completed the circuit breaker procedure. For a brief moment, as systems rebooted, the aircraft responded normally again. Reeves quickly corrected their attitude, leveling the wings and stabilizing their flight path. The respite proved temporary. Within minutes, the intrusion reasserted itself, this time with even greater control over aircraft systems. At 10:45 a.m., the pilots were effectively locked out of their own aircraft. The fly-by-wire system, the electronic interface between pilot controls and the actual control surfaces, had been completely compromised. The autopilot re-engaged itself, but now followed commands from somewhere else. The aircraft began a deliberate turn toward the southeast, descending slowly to 30,000 feet. On the navigation display, a new waypoint appeared, one that wasn't part of their flight plan. The identifier code indicated a location in Ukraine. He's hijacking the aircraft remotely, Reeves realized. This isn't just a system failure. Someone's actively controlling our aircraft. In business class, Voronin monitored his laptop with growing satisfaction. The military-grade intrusion software had overcome the Boeing's security systems more effectively than even he had anticipated. He now had functional control over the aircraft's primary navigation and control systems. The pilots could still provide inputs, but his commands would override theirs. The aircraft was now following coordinates that would take it to a remote airfield in eastern Ukraine, where a team waited to extract both him and the aircraft's valuable technology. What Voronin didn't know was that his unusually focused attention on his laptop had drawn notice. Jackson Meyer, a retired Royal Marines officer traveling in seat 10D, directly behind Voronin, had observed the correlation between the aircraft's unusual behavior and Voronin's activities. When flight attendant Chen passed through checking seatbelts, Meyer quietly signaled her. "The man in 9C, he whispered. "He's controlling something on his laptop that seems connected to what's happening. I've seen that focused look before in operations centers." Chen nodded almost imperceptibly and continued through the cabin, relaying this information to the purser, who communicated it to the cockpit via the interphone. In the cockpit, Reeves and Wilson received this intelligence with grim determination. "We need to regain control," Reeves said. "The only way to break his connection might be to power down all electrical systems simultaneously." "That would mean losing all flight instruments, all hydraulics," Wilson pointed out. "We'd be flying blind in a barely controllable aircraft." "Better than flying perfectly into hostile territory," Reeves replied. "Prepare for manual reversion protocol." This desperate measure, rarely trained for in modern fly-by-wire aircraft, would attempt to bypass the electronic control systems entirely, reverting to the most basic mechanical linkages between the controls and surfaces. It carried enormous risk, but offered their only chance of breaking the hijackers' hold on their aircraft. Meanwhile, in the cabin, a plan was taking shape. Meyer had quietly briefed two other passengers he identified as potentially helpful: a police officer from Manchester and a military pilot from Singapore's Air Force. Flight attendant Harrison had positioned the drink cart strategically near row 9, ready to use it as both weapon and barricade, if necessary. At 10:52 a.m., Captain Reeves's voice came over the cabin address system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a security situation. When I give the command, 'secure,' I need everyone to assume the brace position immediately and remain there until further instructions. I repeat, when you hear 'secure,' brace immediately." This unconventional announcement, part of no standard protocol, caught Voronin's attention. He looked up from his laptop momentarily, scanning the cabin with newfound wariness. Noticing the drink cart positioned nearby and the unusual positioning of cabin crew, he realized his activities had been detected. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, where a compact pistol remained concealed, having been smuggled through security inside the specialized briefcase with compartments designed to defeat scanning technology. At 10:54 a.m., Reeves gave the order to the cabin crew via interphone. "Execute cabin plan on my mark." And then to Wilson, "Ready for manual reversion on my command." The tension in both cockpit and cabin reached its peak. The aircraft continued its unauthorized southeastern heading, now over the Czech Republic and descending through 27,000 feet. Each passing minute brought them closer to Ukraine's border. At 10:55 a.m. exactly, Reeves broadcast a single word throughout the aircraft: "Secure!" 3 critical events happened simultaneously. In the cockpit, Wilson pulled circuit breakers for all primary electrical systems, while Reeves fought to maintain control as the aircraft's systems went dark. In the cabin, passengers assumed the brace position as instructed, creating momentary confusion. At row 9, Maya lunged forward, grabbing Voronin's laptop while Harrison rammed the drink cart forward, pinning Voronin against his seat before he could reach his weapon. The aircraft pitched downward suddenly as electrical systems failed, its nose dropping 15 degrees below the horizon. The engines, designed with mechanical backup systems, continued running, but all electronic displays and controls went blank. The cabin lights extinguished, plunging the interior into darkness, broken only by emergency floor lighting. In the cockpit, Reeves relied on the small standby instruments, powered by an independent battery system, to prevent the developing dive from becoming catastrophic. Using brute force on the manual control linkages, she and Wilson gradually brought the aircraft back to level flight. "Circuit breakers holding," Wilson reported. "Backup power to essential instruments only." "Maintain this configuration," Reeves ordered. "No electrical restoration until we confirm the threat is contained." In business class, a violent struggle ensued, despite the darkness and the aircraft's erratic movements. Voronin fought with the strength of desperation, but found himself overwhelmed by Maya and the other passengers who had joined the effort. The police officer managed to secure Voronin's hands with zip ties from the aircraft's security kit, while the Singaporean pilot seized control of the laptop. Flight attendant Chen hurried to the cockpit with the captured laptop, now powered off. "Suspect is restrained," she reported. "We've secured what appears to be the control device." Reeves nodded. "Keep it powered down. We'll restore minimal electrical systems and attempt to communicate with ATC." With careful sequencing, Wilson restored power to the radio and essential navigation equipment while keeping the flight management computers and automatic control systems isolated. The aircraft remained under manual control, demanding all of Reeves's skill and physical strength to maintain stable flight with the partially functional control systems. At 11:02 a.m., they re-established contact with air traffic control. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, British Airways 2937. We have contained a security threat but are operating with degraded systems, requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport with emergency services standing by." The controller responded promptly. "British Airways 2937, roger your Mayday. Munich Airport is now your closest option, approximately 80 nautical miles at your 10 o'clock position. Descend at your discretion to altitude 10,000 feet. Emergency services will be standing by." The next 40 minutes tested the limits of the crew's training and abilities. Flying an aircraft designed for computerized precision using only manual controls and minimal instrumentation required extraordinary skill. Reeves and Wilson alternated control duties, their arms aching from the unusual forces required to move the control surfaces without hydraulic assistance. In the cabin, the atmosphere remained tense but controlled. The cabin crew, led by Chief Purser Andrea Morrison, maintained calm professionalism, moving through the aircraft to reassure passengers and prepare them for an emergency landing. Voronin remained secured in the rear galley, guarded by Maya and the police officer. At 11:45 a.m., Flight 2937 approached Munich Airport. The weather had deteriorated, with a rain squall reducing visibility. Without functional automatic landing systems, Reeves would need to execute a fully manual landing in challenging conditions on unfamiliar terrain. "Flaps 20, she ordered as they configured for landing. The flap extension, normally a smooth electronic process, required Wilson to use the manual hand crank, a physically demanding task rarely performed outside of training scenarios. "Gear down," came the next command. The landing gear extension, powered by gravity and assisted by the airstream, provided a reassuring trio of green lights on the standby panel. On final approach, the aircraft was buffeted by gusting crosswinds. Reeves compensated with continuous small corrections, fighting not only the weather but the unusual control characteristics of an aircraft operating outside its designed parameters. At 11:52 a.m., the wheels of Flight 2937 touched down on Munich's runway 26R. The landing, firm but controlled, brought spontaneous applause from the passengers. Reeves applied maximum manual braking, bringing the aircraft to a stop midway down the runway. British Airways 2937, clear of the active runway, maintain position, the tower instructed. Emergency vehicles approaching your position. Within minutes, the aircraft was surrounded by police, medical personnel, and anti-terrorism units. The passengers were evacuated via stairs rather than slides, with Voronin removed first under heavy guard. Technical specialists immediately secured his laptop and device for forensic analysis. As the passengers reached the safety of the terminal, the enormity of what they had experienced began to sink in. Many broke down in tears of relief. Others remained eerily calm, still processing the trauma. Medical teams provided immediate support, while police investigators began the painstaking process of interviewing witnesses. Captain Reeves, despite her exhaustion, insisted on being the last to leave the aircraft. As she stepped onto German soil, the weight of responsibility temporarily lifted from her shoulders. She allowed herself a moment of emotion, tears welling in her eyes, before she composed herself to face the waiting authorities. In the days that followed, the full story emerged through intelligence briefings and forensic analysis. Dmitry Voronin was identified as part of a Russian operation aimed at demonstrating capabilities for remote aircraft hijacking. The technology, a combination of hardware and sophisticated malware, exploited vulnerabilities in certain aviation systems that manufacturers had been unaware of. The implications sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Emergency directives grounded dozens of aircraft until software patches could be implemented. Security procedures at airports worldwide underwent immediate review and enhancement. For the passengers and crew of Flight 2937, the aftermath brought both trauma and recognition. Captain Reeves and First Officer Wilson received the British Airways Exceptional Service Medal and were honoured by aviation organisations globally for their extraordinary airmanship. Jackson Meyer and the other passengers who helped subdue Voronin were commended for their courage. Flight attendants Chen, Harrison, and the entire cabin crew received recognition for their professionalism under extreme duress. The incident catalyzed significant advances in aviation cybersecurity. Vulnerabilities that had existed theoretically were now understood as practical threats, prompting a comprehensive overhaul of aircraft electronic architecture. The aviation industry, which had already invested heavily in preventing physical hijackings after 9/11, now faced the reality of digital hijacking as an emerging threat vector. Ethel Whitaker eventually completed her journey to Singapore, meeting her new granddaughter 2 weeks later than planned. The honeymooning Coopers decided to embrace life fully after their brush with disaster, changing careers to pursue long-held dreams. Dr. Sharma incorporated his experience into his medical research, studying the physiological impacts of acute stress. For most passengers, the events of that November day remained the most harrowing experience of their lives. Many struggled with post-traumatic stress, experiencing flashbacks and anxiety about flying. Support groups formed both online and in person, creating communities bound by shared trauma and recovery. 1 month after the incident, British Airways Flight 2937 resumed service on the London-Singapore route, symbolizing the industry's resilience. The first flight carried only 17 passengers, most travelers still wary, but included Captain Reeves at the controls, a deliberate statement of confidence in the enhanced security measures now in place. 6 months later, aviation security experts gathered in London for a symposium dedicated to analysing the incident and preventing similar occurrences. Captain Reeves, now involved in security consultation alongside her flying duties, addressed the assembly. What happened on Flight 2937 represented both a failure and a success. A failure of our systems to anticipate and prevent a sophisticated attack, yes. But also a success of human factors. The alertness of our crew, the courage of our passengers, and the robustness of our training that prepared us to face unprecedented challenges. As we design technologies to protect our aircraft, we must remember that our greatest asset remains the human capacity for awareness, adaptation, and cooperation under pressure. The attempted hijacking of Flight 2937 faded from headlines, but its impact reverberated through the aviation industry in the form of enhanced security, new training protocols, and a heightened awareness of emerging threats. For those who lived through it, however, the memory remained vivid, a reminder of vulnerability and resilience at 35,000 feet, where the line between disaster and survival can hinge on split-second decisions and the coordinated actions of strangers thrown together by fate. As the years passed, the story of Flight 2937 became something of a legend in aviation circles, a case study in pilot skill, crew resource management, and passenger intervention. The aircraft itself, after extensive inspection and modification, returned to service with an unofficial nickname among maintenance crews, the Unconquerable. For Eleanor Reeves, the experience transformed her career trajectory. While she continued flying, she also became a vocal advocate for aviation security reform, testifying before parliamentary committees and consulting with aircraft manufacturers on resilient system design. Every pilot prepares for crisis throughout their career, she often said in her presentations. But preparation can only succeed when it's matched by systemic support, technology that fails gracefully, procedures that accommodate the unexpected, and a culture that values vigilance without paranoia. The technical investigation into Voronin's device yielded disturbing insights. The attack vector he had exploited was more fundamental than anyone had initially suspected. Rather than targeting individual systems, his malware had inserted itself into the aircraft's core data bus, the digital nervous system that enables communication between components. This approach allowed relatively simple commands to create cascading effects throughout interconnected systems. Aviation authorities worldwide implemented a multi-layered response. Physical access to critical systems became more restricted. Digital authentication requirements were strengthened. Most significantly, aircraft designs began incorporating air gaps, physical separations between flight control networks and other systems, making remote intrusion exponentially more difficult. For the passengers, the paths to recovery varied widely. Some sought professional psychological support, working through their trauma in therapeutic settings. Others found healing in advocacy, joining aviation safety organizations, or speaking about their experiences to help others understand the importance of security procedures. A few avoided flying altogether afterward, rebuilding their lives around the limitation. Thomas Wilson, the first officer, chose a different path. 6 months after the incident, he requested transfer to British Airways Training Division, where he developed new simulator scenarios based on the hijacking attempt. "We need to train for the unthinkable," he argued, "because once something has happened, it's no longer unthinkable." Sophia Chen, the flight attendant who had first noticed Voronin's suspicious behavior, received job offers from several security agencies but declined them all. "My place is in the sky," she told colleagues. "Now, more than ever, I understand the importance of being the eyes and ears above the clouds." Her enhanced security awareness training program for cabin crew became standard throughout the airline industry. Jackson Meyer, the retired Royal Marine whose intervention had been crucial, found himself uncomfortable with the hero label thrust upon him by media. "I just did what needed doing," he insisted in his rare interviews, same as anyone with my background would have. Nevertheless, his quick thinking and decisive action had undoubtedly altered the outcome of the hijacking attempt. The technical team that analyzed Voronin's equipment made another disturbing discovery. The attack had not been intended as a single event, but as a proof of concept for a coordinated campaign targeting multiple aircraft simultaneously. Intelligence agencies later identified and neutralized several cells positioned to execute similar hijackings, preventing what could have been an unprecedented aviation disaster. Aviation security conferences in the following years frequently referenced the Heathrow paradigm, the recognition that future threats would likely combine physical and cyber elements in ways that cross traditional security boundaries. "We can no longer think in silos" became the mantra of forward-thinking security professionals. Every physical breach might enable a digital attack. Every digital vulnerability could facilitate physical access. For Dmitry Voronin, the aftermath brought neither glory nor the extraction he had anticipated. Charged with multiple counts of attempted murder, aviation terrorism, and cybercrimes, he faced trial in Germany before eventual extradition to the United Kingdom. His handlers in Russian intelligence disavowed all connection, claiming he had acted as a rogue operative. Whether this distancing was diplomatic convenience or truth remained a matter of speculation among intelligence communities. The psychological impact on the crew and passengers manifested in unexpected ways. Many reported a heightened awareness of their surroundings, not just while flying, but in all public spaces. Some described a profound shift in life priorities, with career ambitions giving way to family connections and personal fulfillment. Others experienced what psychologists termed post-traumatic growth, finding deeper meaning and purpose through the process of recovering from trauma. The incident also accelerated research into autonomous recovery systems for commercial aircraft, technologies that could detect and counteract unauthorized inputs regardless of their source. The aviation industry, traditionally conservative in adopting new technologies due to safety implications, found itself balancing the need for innovation against the imperative for proven reliability. For the intelligence communities of NATO countries, the hijacking attempt provided valuable insight into evolving Russian cyber capabilities. The sophistication of Voronin's equipment suggested state-level research and development beyond what had previously been attributed to Russian programs. Counterintelligence operations shifted focus accordingly, prioritizing aviation infrastructure protection. The media narrative around Flight 2937 evolved over time. Initial reporting focused on the drama and heroism of the event itself. Later, analyses examined the systemic vulnerabilities it revealed and the institutional responses it prompted. Documentaries explored the human stories of passengers and crew, tracking their journeys of recovery and adaptation. The incident became a touchstone for discussions about resilience, both technological and human. Educational institutions incorporated the case study into various curricula. Aviation schools used it to illustrate the importance of manual flying skills in an increasingly automated environment. Cybersecurity programs analyzed the technical aspects of the attack. Psychology courses examined the human response to acute crisis situations. Business schools highlighted the incident in discussions of organizational crisis management. One of the most significant long-term impacts emerged in aircraft design philosophy. For decades, aviation had moved steadily toward greater automation and integration. The hijacking attempt prompted a partial re-evaluation of this trajectory. While automation continued advancing, manufacturers began building in more robust manual reversion capabilities and more intuitive degraded mode operations. The industry acknowledged that the human operator, properly trained and supported, remained the most adaptable component in the aviation system. 2 years after the incident, a memorial was installed in Heathrow's Terminal 5, a simple plaque acknowledging the courage of Flight 2937's passengers and crew. The ceremony dedicating the memorial brought together many of those involved, creating closure for some and reawakening memories for others. Captain Reeves, speaking at the event, emphasized that the memorial served not only to commemorate the past, but to maintain vigilance for the future. What happened once can happen again, in new forms we haven't yet imagined. Our best defense remains our collective awareness and our commitment to one another's safety. The technical vulnerabilities exposed by the incident prompted a reassessment of certification processes for aircraft electronics. Regulatory authorities implemented more rigorous cybersecurity testing requirements, including adversarial penetration testing similar to that used in financial and military systems. Aircraft manufacturers, initially resistant due to cost implications, ultimately embraced the enhanced standards as necessary for maintaining public confidence. For aviation insurers, the incident created an entirely new risk category to assess and price. Cyber-physical aviation risk became a distinct consideration in underwriting policies, with premiums reflecting airlines' investments in both technological protections and human factors training. This financial incentive accelerated adoption of security best practices across the industry. The passengers of Flight 2937 demonstrated the unpredictability of human response to shared trauma. Some formed lasting bonds, creating a community that gathered annually to commemorate their experience. Others preferred to distance themselves entirely, seeking to minimize reminders of that day. The honeymooning Coopers, whose vacation had been so dramatically interrupted, found themselves uncomfortable with the attention and eventually moved abroad, seeking anonymity and a fresh start. Dr. Rajiv Sharma's research into acute stress responses gained new funding and attention following his published papers incorporating data from surveys of willing Flight 2937 passengers. His findings challenged several established assumptions about trauma processing, particularly noting the importance of perceived agency during the event as a predictor of post-traumatic stress severity. Those who had taken some action, even simply helping to comfort others, generally showed better long-term psychological outcomes than those who had been entirely passive. The university sports team developed a complex relationship with their experience. Initially, the shared trauma strengthened their bonds, contributing to a championship season the following year. Over time, however, as team members graduated and new athletes joined, the incident became a kind of institutional mythology, respected but increasingly abstract to those who hadn't lived through it. For Ethel Whitaker, the 73-year-old grandmother who had clutched her rosary during the crisis, the experience reinforced her faith rather than shaking it. "I was meant to meet my granddaughter," she told her family. "Nothing was going to prevent that." She traveled extensively in her remaining years, undeterred by her experience, becoming something of a celebrity within her retirement community for her resilience. The aviation psychology community gained valuable insights from studying the crew's performance under extreme conditions. Captain Reeves's ability to maintain situational awareness while managing both the technical crisis and the security threat represented a gold standard for crew resource management. Training programs incorporated lessons from her decision-making process, particularly her prioritization of threats and delegation of responsibilities. 5 years after the incident, a comprehensive security review revealed an encouraging trend. Attempted breaches of aviation security systems had become significantly more likely to be detected and prevented before reaching operational stages. The industry's increased vigilance, prompted by Flight 2937, had created a more hostile environment for those planning attacks, forcing would-be perpetrators to attempt increasingly complex and therefore more detectable approaches. For Eleanor Reeves personally, the most meaningful aftermath came in the form of letters, hundreds of them, from passengers, from their families, from aspiring pilots inspired by her example. She kept each one, occasionally rereading them when professional challenges seemed overwhelming. The responsibility we carry as pilots is abstract until it becomes desperately concrete, she reflected in her memoir. Those letters remind me that behind every safety procedure, every checklist item, every training scenario are real lives entrusted to our care. The legal proceedings against Voronin extended over 3 years, complicated by jurisdictional questions, intelligence implications, and diplomatic maneuvering. His eventual sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, represented judicial acknowledgement of the severity of his actions. The court's published opinion explicitly rejected his defense claim of being a soldier following orders, establishing important precedent for future cases involving state-sponsored terrorism. Aviation security conferences in the decade following the incident often featured panels reuniting key figures from Flight 2937. These discussions highlighted how the complementary roles of technical systems, professional crew, and alert passengers had collectively prevented disaster. The consensus that emerged emphasized layered security, the concept that no single measure provides complete protection, but multiple overlapping systems create robust defense. The attempted hijacking also influenced popular culture, inspiring a critically acclaimed film that strove for technical accuracy while exploring the human drama of the event. Several passengers and crew served as consultants, ensuring the portrayal respected the actual experience without sensationalizing trauma. The film's commercial success prompted renewed public interest in aviation security issues, creating political pressure for sustained funding of protection measures that might otherwise have faced budget cuts. For British Airways, the incident created a complex public relations challenge. On one hand, the airline received praise for the training and professionalism of its crew. On the other, questions arose about how Voronin had managed to board with prohibited technology. The company responded with transparent acknowledgement of security gaps and visible commitment to addressing them, ultimately emerging with its reputation enhanced rather than damaged. Aviation historians later identified the Flight 2937 incident as a pivotal moment in the evolution of aircraft security, comparable to reinforced cockpit doors after 9/11 in its industry-wide impact. The recognition that digital systems could be weaponized against the aircraft itself fundamentally altered security paradigms, shifting focus from passengers as potential threats to the aircraft as a vulnerable target requiring protection from multiple vectors. The technical investigation into Voronin's device revealed another disturbing dimension. It had been designed to learn and adapt to countermeasures. Had the crew's response been less decisive, the malware would have developed increasing resistance to their efforts to regain control. This discovery accelerated research into artificial intelligence applications for defensive aviation systems, programs designed to detect and counter anomalous inputs in real time. For cybersecurity professionals, the incident highlighted the dangerous convergence of digital and physical systems. Attacks previously considered theoretical had manifested in the real world with potentially catastrophic consequences. Academic papers analyzing the technical aspects of the hijacking attempt proliferated, informing security practices not only in aviation, but in all critical infrastructure protected by similar systems. Religious leaders from various traditions found in Flight 2937 a powerful metaphor for human cooperation transcending differences. Passengers from diverse backgrounds, nationalities, and beliefs had united in a moment of crisis, setting aside potential divisions to ensure collective survival. Sermons and spiritual writings reference the incident as evidence of humanity's capacity for solidarity under pressure. The psychological impact on Captain Reeves emerged gradually. While outwardly maintaining professional composure and even serving as a spokesperson for enhanced aviation security, she privately struggled with recurring nightmares and hypervigilance in the cockpit. 6 months after the incident, she took a brief leave of absence for intensive therapy. Her eventual return to flying and her willingness to discuss her psychological journey helped reduce stigma around mental health support for aviation professionals facing trauma. Flight attendant James Harrison, who had positioned the drink cart as a barricade, left the aviation industry entirely, finding the constant reminders of the incident too taxing for continued service. However, he channeled his experience into a new career in emergency management, where his first-hand understanding of crisis response proved invaluable. "Sometimes your worst day becomes your greatest teacher," he observed in an interview years later. For the intelligence community, the revelation of sophisticated aircraft hijacking technology triggered urgent reassessment of other potential cyber-physical threats. Analysts identified parallel vulnerabilities in maritime systems, railway networks, and power grid infrastructure, leading to coordinated international efforts to harden critical systems against similar attacks. The incident served as a wake-up call, demonstrating that theoretical threats had advanced to operational capability faster than many had anticipated. 7 years after the incident, a follow-up study of Flight 2937 passengers revealed an unexpected finding. Many reported that the experience had ultimately enriched their lives despite its trauma. The phenomenon, which psychologists termed adversity-activated development, manifested in deeper appreciation for daily experiences, more meaningful relationships, and greater resilience in facing life's ordinary challenges. As one passenger expressed it, "After you've faced what we faced, traffic jams and work deadlines lose their power to disturb your peace." The aviation industry's response to the incident evolved from reactive to proactive. Initial measures focused on patching the specific vulnerabilities Voronin had exploited. Later, initiatives took broader approaches, implementing continuous security monitoring, regular penetration testing, and incentives for ethical hackers to identify weaknesses before they could be weaponized. The concept of security by design became a fundamental principle in aviation systems development. For Jackson Meyer, the ex-Royal Marine whose intervention had been crucial, the aftermath brought unexpected professional opportunities. Security consulting firms sought his expertise in threat assessment and response training. Though initially reluctant to commodify his experience, he eventually established a specialized practice focused on teaching ordinary citizens to recognize and appropriately react to emerging threats in public spaces. His philosophy, awareness without paranoia, resonated widely in an increasingly security-conscious world. The incident catalyzed significant advances in aircraft control system architecture. Manufacturers implemented multiple layers of authentication for critical commands, air-gapped certain systems to prevent remote access, and developed trust but verify protocols that required physical confirmation of unusual digital instructions. These changes represented the most substantial overhaul of aircraft control philosophy since the introduction of fly-by-wire technology decades earlier. Legal scholars found in the Voronin case complex questions about jurisdiction, attribution, and accountability in transnational aviation crimes with potential state involvement. The prosecution had navigated unprecedented territory, establishing precedents that would inform future cases at the intersection of terrorism, cybercrime, and espionage. Law schools added the case to their curricula, examining how traditional legal frameworks adapted to novel threats that crossed both national boundaries and conceptual categories. 6 months after the incident, an anonymous passenger from Flight 2937 published a widely read essay describing how the experience had transformed their relationship with fear. "Before that day, I structured my life to avoid discomfort and uncertainty," they wrote. "Now I recognize that safety is never guaranteed, regardless of precautions. Paradoxically, this knowledge has made me braver, more willing to embrace life's inherent risks for the sake of its rewards." The essay resonated far beyond those directly affected by the hijacking attempt, speaking to universal human struggles with vulnerability and courage. The aviation security community developed a concept they termed the Voronin threshold, the point at which a potential threat becomes sufficiently credible to warrant aggressive intervention despite uncertainty. Training scenarios incorporated this threshold, helping crews identify the crucial moment when waiting for more information becomes more dangerous than acting on incomplete evidence. Captain Reeves's decision to initiate the manual reversion protocol based on limited data became the textbook example of appropriate threshold recognition. For Ethel Whitaker, the grandmother who had clutched her rosary during the crisis, the experience deepened both her faith and her sense of purpose. In the remaining years of her life, she became an advocate for seniors maintaining active lifestyles despite potential risks. "Fear ages you faster than years ever could," became her motto as she encouraged her contemporaries to continue traveling and engaging with the world. The honeymooning Coopers, after initially struggling with trauma-induced anxiety, eventually transformed their experience into creative expression. Jason Cooper, previously an accountant, began writing fiction exploring themes of courage and unexpected challenge. His first novel, while not directly referencing Flight 2937, drew emotional authenticity from that experience. Melissa Cooper incorporated elements of their shared trauma into her work as a school counselor, helping young people develop resilience through adversity. The technical analysis of Voronin's device revealed connections to broader patterns of state-sponsored cyber operations. Digital forensics identified code fragments matching those used in attacks on power grids, election systems, and financial networks across Europe and North America. This evidence strengthened international resolve to establish meaningful consequences for nations engaging in such activities, leading to new sanctions frameworks and diplomatic initiatives focused on cyber norms. For the aviation industry, one of the most significant long-term impacts emerged in training philosophy. The successful resolution of the Flight 2937 crisis had depended on skills that traditional pilot training had begun to de-emphasize in the age of automation: manual flying ability, systems knowledge deep enough to function without electronic assistance, and intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior. Training programs subsequently rebalanced, ensuring pilots maintained these fundamental capabilities alongside proficiency with advanced systems. The psychological support provided to passengers and crew became a model for post-crisis intervention. Rather than assuming a one-size-fits-all approach, mental health professionals offered a spectrum of resources, recognizing that individuals process trauma differently based on personality, prior experiences, and cultural background. This nuanced approach, later termed personalized trauma response, influenced emergency management practices far beyond aviation incidents. 7 years after the incident, an international aviation security summit in Singapore featured an unexpected reconciliation. Captain Reeves, attending as a keynote speaker, encountered the wife and daughter of Dmitry Voronin, who had traveled from Russia hoping to meet her. The private conversation that followed, its details known only to the participants, reportedly addressed forgiveness, accountability, and the complex human realities behind geopolitical conflicts. While no public statement emerged from this meeting, those who observed it described a powerful moment of human connection, transcending the categories of perpetrator and victim. The aviation industry's enhanced focus on cybersecurity created new career paths and specializations. Universities developed programs combining aeronautical engineering with computer security, producing graduates equipped to protect increasingly computerized aircraft. These aviation cybersecurity engineers commanded premium salaries and found themselves at the forefront of a rapidly evolving field where technical expertise met life-critical applications. For passengers with specialized knowledge, the incident raised difficult questions about responsibility during crisis. Several software engineers aboard Flight 2937 later expressed guilt about not recognizing or responding to the cyber aspects of the hijacking attempt. Support groups addressed this bystander regret, helping technical professionals understand the limitations of individual action in complex, time-constrained emergencies. The conversation expanded to ethical considerations for professionals in all fields. What obligations exist when specialized knowledge becomes relevant to public safety? The incident accelerated the aviation industry's adoption of secure development practices previously common only in military and financial sectors. Code reviews, threat modeling, and security testing became standard elements of the aircraft certification process. Manufacturers established dedicated red teams charged with attempting to compromise systems before release, ensuring vulnerabilities would be discovered and addressed by defenders rather than exploiters. For Thomas Wilson, the first officer whose quick implementation of the circuit breaker procedure had been crucial to breaking Voronin's control, the aftermath brought both professional advancement and personal challenge. Promoted to captain ahead of his peer group trajectory, he found himself wrestling with imposter syndrome, questioning whether the recognition reflected genuine merit or merely circumstantial heroism. His eventual resolution of this conflict, accepting that crisis performance revealed rather than created capability, informed his approach to mentoring junior pilots facing their own self-doubt. The passenger manifest of Flight 2937 had included 4 children traveling without their parents, unaccompanied minors, entrusted to airline care. The cabin crew's protection of these vulnerable passengers, ensuring they received priority assistance during the crisis, became a case study in professional responsibility, extending beyond procedural compliance. Aviation regulators subsequently strengthened requirements for unaccompanied minor protocols during irregular operations, explicitly addressing emergency scenarios. 10 years after the incident, aviation security experts gathered at Heathrow for a symposium evaluating the decade's progress. The consensus acknowledged substantial improvements in technical protections, human factors training, and international cooperation. However, speakers cautioned against complacency, noting that threat actors continued developing new approaches for every countermeasure implemented. The symposium's concluding statement emphasized security as process rather than state, a continuous evolution requiring sustained commitment rather than a destination that could be reached and completed. For British Airways, the long-term corporate response extended beyond security enhancements to embrace broader organizational resilience. The company developed what management theorists later termed crisis-informed culture, operational practices that maintained efficiency during normal operations while enabling rapid adaptation during disruption. This approach, balancing optimization against flexibility, influenced business thinking across industries dealing with high-consequence operations in uncertain environments. The technical vulnerabilities Voronin had exploited prompted fundamental reassessment of the certification process for aircraft systems. Regulatory authorities implemented adversarial review requirements, forcing manufacturers to demonstrate not only that systems functioned as designed, but also that they resisted deliberate attempts at subversion. This shift, from assuming benign operating conditions to anticipating hostile manipulation, represented a paradigm change in aviation safety philosophy. For the intelligence agencies tracking similar threats, the Flight 2937 incident provided valuable insight into operational methodologies. Analysts identified distinctive patterns in the attack's technical implementation, enabling attribution to specific development teams within Russia's military intelligence structure. This attribution capability, while rarely acknowledged publicly, strengthened deterrence by demonstrating that anonymity could not be assumed even in sophisticated cyber operations. Religious leaders from various traditions found in the Flight 2937 experience a powerful metaphor for spiritual themes. Sermons and writings reference the incident when discussing concepts of providence, human agency, and communal responsibility. The image of passengers from diverse backgrounds uniting in crisis resonated particularly strongly, offering a counterpoint to narratives of inevitable division and conflict in pluralistic societies. For cybersecurity researchers, forensic analysis of Voronin's equipment yielded technical insights that informed defensive measures across multiple industries. The attack had employed novel methods for compromising air-gapped systems and establishing persistence despite power cycling, techniques previously theoretical but now demonstrated operational. Academic papers analyzing these methods helped security professionals anticipate and counter similar approaches in other critical infrastructure contexts. The legal proceedings against Voronin established important precedent at the intersection of international law, cybercrime, and terrorism. The prosecution successfully argued that digital actions causing physical danger should carry penalties comparable to traditional violent crimes, a position previously contested in legal scholarship. This judicial recognition that bits can kill influenced subsequent cases involving weaponized technology across multiple jurisdictions. 8 years after the incident, a documentary film brought together passengers, crew members, investigators, and security experts to reflect on the lasting impact of Flight 2937. The film's most powerful moments came from unexpected connections. The grandmother who had prayed throughout the crisis meeting the university student who had drawn courage from her calm. The flight attendant who had first noticed suspicious behavior reuniting with the passengers whose lives her vigilance had helped save. These human stories, more than technical analyses, conveyed the essential message that security ultimately depends on ordinary people making extraordinary choices under pressure. For Eleanor Reeves, the ultimate professional validation came not from official commendations, but from the quiet acknowledgement of fellow pilots. When she entered crew rooms in airports worldwide, the brief nods of respect from colleagues who understood exactly what she had accomplished meant more than any formal recognition. The aviation community's internal standards, rigorous, uncompromising, and largely invisible to outsiders, had always been her true measure of success. The flight attendant community incorporated lessons from Flight 2937 into their professional identity and training. Chen and Harrison's actions demonstrated that cabin crew were not merely service providers, but essential security personnel with unique observational opportunities. Training programs increasingly emphasize this security dimension, teaching subtle observation techniques and decision frameworks for evaluating potential threats without creating unnecessary alarm. For the aviation regulators tasked with preventing similar incidents, Flight 2937 prompted difficult questions about the balance between innovation and safety. The industry's rapid technological advancement had created vulnerabilities by implementing new systems faster than security frameworks could adapt. The resulting regulatory approach emphasized security by design, requiring protection measures to be integrated from initial concept rather than added after development. The passengers of Flight 2937 demonstrated widely varying responses to their shared trauma. Some became hypervigilant about security in all contexts, scanning environments for threats and escape routes as automatic behavior. Others developed specific aviation anxiety despite maintaining normal function in other areas of life. A surprising number reported reduced anxiety about everyday concerns, having recalibrated their threat assessment to recognize truly significant danger. Professional mental health support acknowledged all these responses as valid adaptations to extraordinary circumstances. For Jackson Meyer, whose intervention had helped contain Voronin, the experience reinforced his belief in civilian responsibility during crisis. His subsequent security consulting practice emphasized that while specialized responders are essential, ordinary citizens often become the first line of defense simply by virtue of proximity. The first person who can help is whoever's already there became his guiding principle, informing training programs that balanced awareness against paralyzing hypervigilance. The technical investigation into Voronin's device yielded a particularly disturbing discovery. The software contained dormant modules designed to target other critical aircraft systems if the initial attack had proceeded undetected. These secondary capabilities, including oxygen system manipulation and pressurization control, suggested planning for maximum casualties rather than merely diverting the aircraft. This evidence of lethal intent strengthened the case for treating cyber attacks on aviation as equivalent to traditional terrorism. 15 years after the incident, a follow-up study of Flight 2937 passengers revealed something researchers termed anniversary anxiety, a phenomenon where approaching milestone dates triggered temporary increases in stress symptoms even among those who had achieved substantial recovery. This finding informed trauma treatment approaches, emphasizing that healing follows non-linear patterns requiring ongoing rather than time-limited support. For Thomas Wilson, the first officer who had implemented the critical circuit breaker procedure, the incident's aftermath included unexpected spiritual dimensions. Though not previously religious, he found himself drawn to philosophical questions about fate, purpose, and meaning. When you've participated in something that statistically shouldn't have succeeded, you can't help questioning whether mere chance was operating, he explained in a rare interview. His subsequent exploration of various wisdom traditions led him to develop a personal philosophy emphasizing prepared mindfulness, the practice of simultaneously accepting uncertainty while preparing for multiple contingencies. The aviation industry's technical response to the hijacking attempt included significant investment in quantum cryptography research. Traditional encryption methods, potentially vulnerable to future computing advances, were recognized as insufficient protection for life-critical systems. The resulting developments, initially focused on aviation security, found applications across multiple industries, requiring unbreakable communication channels. For the intelligence community, the Flight 2937 incident highlighted growing tension between national security and public safety interests. The vulnerabilities Voronin had exploited had been known to certain government agencies, who had preserved them as potential offensive capabilities rather than disclosing them for patching. This revelation prompted heated debate about responsible disclosure policies for critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, ultimately leading to more balanced approaches prioritizing civilian protection. 7 years after the incident, British Airways commemorated the anniversary by announcing the Eleanor Reeves Scholarship, providing full funding for women pursuing commercial pilot training. The program specifically sought candidates from backgrounds underrepresented in aviation, recognizing that diverse perspectives strengthen problem-solving during crisis. Reeves herself served on the selection committee, identifying candidates who demonstrated not merely technical aptitude, but the judgment and resilience critical to aviation leadership. The university sports team that had traveled on Flight 2937 maintained a unique commemorative tradition. Each year on the incident's anniversary, team members, including those who joined long after the event, participated in community service projects rather than regular practice. This ritual, acknowledging their predecessors' experience while transforming it into positive action, helped integrate the team's traumatic history into constructive identity rather than defining limitation. For Sophia Chen, the flight attendant whose alertness had first identified suspicious behavior, the incident reinforced her commitment to aviation despite opportunities to transition to higher-paying security roles. "The sky remains where I belong," she explained when declining a government intelligence position. "Every flight where nothing extraordinary happens is its own success story." Her perspective influenced cabin crew culture, emphasizing that routine vigilance, preventing incidents deserved as much respect as dramatic intervention during crises. The psychological impact on passengers manifested differently across demographic groups. Younger passengers generally demonstrated greater resilience, integrating the experience into their developing identities without defining trauma. Older passengers showed more variable responses, with some experiencing significant post-traumatic stress, while others demonstrated remarkable adaptability. This pattern informed age-specific approaches to trauma support, recognizing that life stage influences both vulnerability and recovery resources. For Dr. Rajiv Sharma, the medical researcher who had been returning from a conference, the incident catalyzed a shift in research focus. His subsequent work examined physiological responses to acute stress, identifying biomarkers that might predict vulnerability to post-traumatic stress disorder. This research led to preventive interventions for high-risk occupations and improved treatments for those experiencing trauma aftermath. When asked about this career redirection, he observed, "Sometimes the most important research questions find you rather than the reverse." 20 years after the incident, as aircraft increasingly incorporated artificial intelligence for system management, the lessons of Flight 2937 informed design philosophy for these autonomous capabilities. Engineers implemented what they termed human-centered AI, systems programmed to maintain pilot authority while providing decision support rather than replacement. This approach reflected the incident's central lesson that human judgment, properly trained and supported, remained the most adaptable response to unprecedented threats. For the aviation security community, one of the most significant long-term impacts emerged in information-sharing practices. Prior to the incident, competitive concerns and bureaucratic barriers had limited exchange of threat intelligence between airlines, manufacturers, and government agencies. The near-disaster catalyzed development of secure sharing frameworks that protected proprietary information, while ensuring critical security data reached all relevant stakeholders, a model later adopted by other industries facing similar cooperative challenges. The legal framework for aviation cybersecurity evolved substantially in response to the incident. International agreements established clear jurisdictional protocols for prosecuting digital attacks on aircraft, eliminating potential safe havens for perpetrators. Penalties were aligned with physical hijacking attempts, reflecting equivalent potential harm regardless of method. These legal advances complemented technical countermeasures, creating a more comprehensive security environment addressing both capability and consequence dimensions. For Ethel Whitaker's granddaughter, the newborn she had been traveling to meet, The incident became family lore that shaped her understanding of her grandmother's character. Growing up hearing the story, she developed early awareness of both human vulnerability and resilience. When she eventually pursued a career in emergency management, she credited those childhood narratives. Before I could understand the technical details, I understood that ordinary people can face extraordinary challenges with dignity. That lesson defined my professional path. The honeymooning Coopers, after initially planning never to fly again, gradually reclaimed their mobility through deliberate exposure therapy. Beginning with short domestic flights and progressively increasing distance, they ultimately completed the Singapore journey that had been so traumatically interrupted, a personal victory celebrated with the Flight 2937 support community that had encouraged their healing journey. Their experience became a case study in trauma recovery literature, demonstrating how reclaiming activities associated with traumatic events can support integration and resilience. For aviation historians, Flight 2937 marked a pivotal moment in the industry's evolution, comparable to the introduction of jet engines or pressurized cabins in its impact on fundamental practices. The incident demonstrated that aviation's exceptional safety record, achieved through decades of learning from physical accidents, required complementary approaches for emerging digital threats that couldn't be understood through traditional crash investigation methods. This recognition prompted development of new analytical frameworks incorporating cybersecurity principles into aviation safety culture. The intelligence community's analysis of Voronin's background revealed a disturbing pattern. His recruitment had targeted specific psychological vulnerabilities, including financial distress and ideological disillusionment. This insight informed counterintelligence programs designed to identify and support individuals with similar vulnerability profiles before exploitation could occur. The resulting preventive approach proved more cost-effective than responding to attacks, while also protecting potential recruits from manipulation. For Thomas Wilson, the first officer who had implemented the critical circuit breaker procedure, the incident's aftermath included an unexpected dimension of survivors' guilt. Learning that similar hijacking attempts had been planned for other flights, potentially with catastrophic results, he struggled with the seemingly arbitrary nature of their survival. Why were we the ones who detected it in time, when others might not have? This question led him to intensive involvement in security training programs, attempting to ensure that future crews would have every possible advantage his experience could provide. The aviation psychology community incorporated insights from Flight 2937 into selection criteria for pilot candidates. Beyond technical aptitude and physical qualifications, evaluations began emphasizing cognitive flexibility, stress tolerance, and collaborative decision-making, attributes that had proven critical during the crisis. This evolution reflected growing recognition that modern aviation challenges required not merely skilled operators, but resilient decision-makers capable of effective function under unprecedented conditions. For Eleanor Reeves, perhaps the most meaningful legacy emerged, not from industry changes, but from personal correspondence. A generation of young women pursuing aviation careers wrote to express how her example had influenced their ambitions. "You showed that excellence isn't gender-dependent," one such letter read. "When my flight instructor suggested I lacked the right temperament for emergency management, I remembered your story and persisted." These connections across experience levels enriched Reeves's later career as both pilot and mentor, allowing her to transform individual trauma into collective empowerment. 25 years after the incident, as autonomous aircraft systems became commercially viable, the lessons of Flight 2937 profoundly influenced their design philosophy. The fundamental principle that human operators must maintain ultimate authority with meaningful override capability, derived directly from the hijacking attempt's resolution. This approach, balancing automation benefits against human judgment value, represented the incident's most enduring technical legacy. For the passengers of Flight 2937, the long-term psychological impact defied simple categorization. Many reported a phenomenon psychologists termed post-traumatic growth, positive life changes catalyzed by trauma processing. These included deepened appreciation for relationships, clarified personal values, and enhanced sense of personal strength. While not diminishing the incident's difficulty, this growth dimension highlighted human capacity for deriving meaning from even the most challenging experiences. The aviation security community developed a concept they termed predictive response, training that prepared personnel not merely for known threats, but for novel combinations of tactics and technologies. This approach, emphasizing pattern recognition and adaptive thinking rather than procedural compliance alone, reflected the central lesson of Flight 2937, that tomorrow's threats will manifest in forms not precisely matching historical precedent. The resulting training methodology influenced security practices across multiple industries facing similar evolutionary challenges. For Sophia Chen, the flight attendant whose vigilance had first identified suspicious behavior, the incident reinforced convictions about intuition's value in security contexts. "Something felt wrong before I could articulate what or why," she explained in training sessions. This perspective influenced cabin crew culture, validating the importance of reporting concerns even without concrete evidence. A shift from earlier emphasis on avoiding false alarms toward ensuring no genuine threat went unexamined. The technical investigation into Voronin's device yielded insights that transformed aviation cybersecurity architecture. Beyond addressing specific vulnerabilities, manufacturers implemented defense-in-depth approaches, multiple protective layers requiring separate compromise rather than single point-of-failure designs. This philosophy, adapted from military cybersecurity practices, acknowledged that perfect protection remained unattainable, making resilience and containment equally important as prevention. For Jackson Meyer, whose intervention had helped contain Voronin, the incident reinforced beliefs about civilian responsibility during crisis. His subsequent security consulting practice emphasized that specialized responders, while essential, rarely arrive during a crisis's initial moments. The true first responders are already present when an incident begins, became his guiding principle, informing training programs that balanced awareness against paralyzing hypervigilance. The aviation industry's response to the incident included substantial investment in human factors research, examining how cockpit and cabin crew could more effectively collaborate during complex emergencies crossing traditional operational boundaries. The resulting integrated crew resource management approach acknowledged that modern threats often manifest in ways that blur distinctions between technical, security, and service domains, requiring coordinated response across traditionally separate crew functions. For Dr. Rajiv Sharma, the medical researcher aboard Flight 2937, the incident catalyzed research into physiological resilience under acute stress. His subsequent work identified biomarkers associated with adaptive versus maladaptive stress responses, leading to interventions that could enhance performance in crisis situations. When colleagues questioned this departure from his previous research focus, he responded simply, "Some questions find you at 35,000 feet, and professional integrity demands you answer them." 30 years after the incident, as artificial intelligence applications became ubiquitous in aviation, the lessons of Flight 2937 continued influencing design philosophy. engineers implemented what they termed transparent AI, systems whose decision processes remained comprehensible to human operators rather than functioning as inscrutable black boxes. This approach reflected the incident's demonstration that meaningful human oversight required understanding system behavior, particularly during anomalous conditions. For the aviation security community, one of the most significant long-term impacts emerged in information-sharing practices. Prior to the incident, competitive concerns and bureaucratic barriers had limited exchange of threat intelligence between airlines, manufacturers, and government agencies. The near-disaster catalyzed development of secure sharing frameworks that protected proprietary information, while ensuring critical security data reached all relevant stakeholders, a model later adopted by other industries facing similar cooperative challenges. As retirement approached for Eleanor Reeves after a distinguished career spanning 4 decades, professional recognition took unexpected form. Rather than conventional honors celebrating past achievement, colleagues established the Reeves Initiative, a forward-looking program supporting research into emergent aviation security challenges. This focus on future protection rather than past commemoration perfectly captured Reeves's philosophy that safety requires continuous evolution rather than complacent reflection on past successes. The passengers of Flight 2937 demonstrated how shared trauma can catalyze enduring human connections, transcending ordinary social boundaries. The support community that emerged in the incident's aftermath, initially focused on recovery, evolved into a network celebrating life milestones, supporting charitable initiatives, and maintaining friendships that might never have formed under ordinary circumstances. This transformation from trauma bond to genuine community illustrated humanity's remarkable capacity to derive connection from even the most challenging shared experiences. For aviation historians, Flight 2937 represented a pivotal moment when the industry's digital transformation confronted its physical realities, when abstract cybersecurity concerns materialized as tangible threats to human life. The successful resolution, combining technical intervention with human courage and skill, established a template for addressing the complex challenges emerging at this digital-physical intersection. The incident thus took its place in aviation's evolutionary narrative, not merely as crisis averted, but as catalyst for necessary adaptation to changing threat landscapes. In the final analysis, the attempted hijacking of Flight 2937 revealed both vulnerability and resilience, the vulnerability inherent in complex technological systems, and the resilience residing in the human capacity for awareness, adaptation, and cooperation under pressure. The incident demonstrated that safety in our interconnected world depends not on perfect protection, which remains perpetually unattainable, but on layered defenses combining technological safeguards with human vigilance and decisive action when threats materialize. This balance, technological sophistication guided by human judgment, remains the essential formula for security in an age of evolving threats. As you've followed this extraordinary story of courage, quick thinking, and resilience in the skies, we invite you to become part of our community dedicated to sharing powerful, true stories that inspire and inform. Subscribe to our channel for more untold tales of human triumph over adversity, technological challenges overcome through ingenuity, and moments when ordinary people rise to extraordinary circumstances. By subscribing, you'll never miss our weekly releases that bring to light the remarkable stories happening all around us that often go untold. Join us as we continue to explore the human capacity for heroism, innovation, and connection in the face of our greatest challenges. Click the subscribe button now and become part of a community that celebrates the best of humanity's response to crisis and danger.